Hello and welcome to Michael's Minty Music for today. Today we review the Portal 1 soundtrack, released in 2007 with the game and composed by Kelly Bailey and Mike Morasky. It was officially released in 2011 with the collector's edition of the Portal 2 soundtrack, although you could have accessed the files and listened to it anytime from 2007 on with the release of Portal 1. It is a pretty good soundtrack. This is the track listing, and these are the tracks I added to my playlist, 7 out of 13, so just 1 over half. This soundtrack is pretty good. In-game, there's some amount of procedural kind of generation for how the tracks play against each other, so some of them here are a bit more boring on their own. Until the back half, all the tracks are pretty ambient, which isn't terrible, but also not a great start for kind of a flow. It does allow things to speed up in the back half, just pretty similar to the game though, which is pretty interesting and yeah, not terrible. 4,000 Degrees Kelvin is used at a specific moment in the game and is a great track. Additionally, that final pop track, Still Alive, is a great touch of different to give the soundtrack a bit of character. So overall, it's kind of a fine flow, but not incredible. The genre here is a much subtler version of the techno stuff from the Half-Life soundtracks. Nothing here is particularly hard rock or orchestral like those ones though. It's just kind of more pure techno, varying in speed from low energy ambient tracks to the upbeat instrumentals that are built around a specific beat or instrument. The result of this is that the Portal soundtrack manages to sound different from all the other Valve soundtracks aside from the Portal 2 soundtrack, and comes together a bit better as well. Even though, as I mentioned, the start of the album is not great, the sound is much more consistent than some of the other soundtracks. Still, a good chunk of the tracks here are a bit boring since they aren't supposed to stand out in-game at all. The soundtrack out of context is not incredible. It sounds a lot better in-game than it does outside of the game. There were no singles released before the album, obviously, and my favorite track here is probably that last one, Still Alive. Almost definitely the best sort of single individual track here, but it's the end credit song and it doesn't really fit in with anything else as it's a standard kind of pop song. For the best sort of regular track, I'd probably go with 4,000 Degrees Kelvin for the one that kind of sounds like everything else, but the best. I rank this album the worst out of Mike Morasky's work with Valve, although that's mostly just because the TF2 and Portal 2 soundtracks are kind of clear improvements. The TF2 soundtrack has definitely more variety, and the Portal 2 soundtrack is generally higher quality on a track-by-track basis. Plus, it builds off of the Portal 1 soundtrack, so there's just clear improvements there. More interesting is the ranking with all the video game soundtracks I've heard, where it ranks 9th out of 13. So in the bottom, but still above a good chunk of albums. It beats out most of Kelly Bailey's work in my opinion, only losing out to the original Half-Life soundtrack, which comes together much better than all the other Half-Life soundtracks, and has a more consistent quality than the Portal soundtrack in my opinion. It's still pretty close. These two albums are kind of neck and neck. They both have a similar style and kind of concept where the sound is pretty consistent, but they don't have a super high quality on a track-by-track basis. Unsurprisingly, this album doesn't take my top spot from 2007. That stays with Maroon 5's It Won't Be Soon Before Long, which is a really great album and definitely the better album here in terms of quality and based on normal album versus soundtrack. So thank you for watching. Next up is Fall Out Boy's 2005 album From Under the Cork Tree. Their first album was pretty good, so I'm expecting a pretty good follow-up here. I'm really interested to see what's on there, so stay tuned for that, and as always, stay minty.